Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Healthcare du Jour is brought to you by Carium, the telehealth platform enabling healthcare's digital transformation, helping you care for people within the fabric of their daily lives. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Dr. Jose Barreau, CEO and co-founder at Halo Health. Dr. Barreau, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
So what I always like to do before getting into the main part of the conversation is to give my guest a chance to give a bit more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So Dr. Barreau, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, my background, I'm an oncologist. I'm a medical oncologist, actually practiced cancer medicine and for 15 years. And really by practicing medicine and working with cancer patients, realized that healthcare communication was a big problem. And it was a real reason why physicians and nurses were frustrated with their work, and also why patients sometimes didn't get the best care possible. Communication collaboration was broken down in healthcare, and that's what got me into really trying to fix this problem and working with communication technology in healthcare.
So before diving into kind of what that focuses on, in terms of, I think as you just framed it, communication collaboration, what was your original inspiration for getting into medicine?
Well, actually, my original inspiration was actually my grandmother. She had Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was older. And that's when I really got involved, going to the physician with her, talking to the oncologist, and just being in awe of this oncologist giving this older lady chemotherapy, every week. And she completely recovered, as most people with Hodgkin's lymphoma do, and just kicked off a career in medicine. And I knew I wanted to go into oncology right from the beginning.
And how have you seen kind of the practice of medicine evolving from that initial experience to then actually becoming, a practicing physician? And I think now probably, carrying that forward to beginning to tackle some of the issues that, kind of inspired you to get into the technology side.
Well, medicine has evolved tremendously since that time when I was in my 20s. And just from an oncology standpoint, the amount of medications, the immunotherapy, the gene therapy, the clinical trials just have evolved tremendously to, having just a couple chemotherapy options to having 100 and molecular therapies and everything else. So tremendous advancement on the biological, and therapy side. And then in the technology side, obviously electronic health records swept in, and people were still on paper charts and reading films from radiology back then. And just in a matter of 15, 20 years, it seemed like everyone went digital for radiology, and electronic health records are now in just about every hospital. Now, the good news is that happened, but it really still left the void in communication and collaboration. So documentation and billing and all those types of things have really been standardized. But really the next frontier is really communication and collaboration is and what we noticed and why we jumped in to tackle it.
So kind of before discussing some of the ways that you're trying to tackle that problem, can you lay the groundwork in terms of, what is the issue that you're working to resolve?
Well, the issue, might go back 70 years to the introduction of the pager, which is a very efficient machine and a sign of prestige for doctors, carrying it for 50 years. And so, how physicians communicated and how you communicated with physicians kind of laid the groundwork on, is unidirectional. You call somebody and they call you back when it's appropriate. And also one doctor took care of one patient, that there weren't so many specialists and teams around patients. So, so the need to collaborate wasn't there. So over time, really, the pager has still survived, but the requirements for communication have evolved because so many people are involved in patient care. It's not just a doctor and a patient. It's a lot of doctors and a team around every patient and a lot of specialists and everything. So it really, communication is really the final frontier, and people don't realize that pagers are almost in 80% of hospitals still. It's the last frontier to really get digitized and to come into this next era.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the pagers are still very much in existence. I know there's one sitting in my house all the time from my wife, who's a primary care physician. So it's,
Oh,
we
really?
always,
Yeah.
and I also grew up around it because my dad is a doctor too. So it's, I always remember, when he was on call, the beeping would start coming, and you'd start hunting around to find it.
And my dad was a doctor too, and he had the one that you actually talk into it. So as a kid, I used to say, "Dad, when are you coming home for dinner?" And he would be in the OR, and people would be listening to my voice coming through. So yeah, so they're still alive, and but now there's technology that can replace them. There's pagers are still alive for a reason. They did a very good function. You can hand it off to somebody else, and they walk away, and you're done with the responsibility. But you need to create technology that can handle those complex workflows. So.
Yeah, and I think kind of the way you were framing it is you were saying that it was an effective tool when you had more of a one-to-one relationship of the
That's
physician to a patient. But as you're describing it and painting the picture of you have these more comprehensive care teams, it sounds like you want more of a multi-directional flow for the communications. I think you also kind of help describe the pager as unidirectional. So it's really just pushing messages in one way and then trying to solicit a response, as opposed to allowing for ongoing collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the evolution of healthcare is there's more providers, there's more information, there's more options, and there's more people taking care of patients. So just that one-to-one relationship, when internal medicine doc used to do everything back in 1950 and 1960, and so they took care of most problems. Now you have hospitalists that have multiple consultants. So one patient, admitted to the hospital can have 6 consultants. They can have 9 people around them at any given time, rotating in and out of roles and shifts. And so to keep that communication and that care team, collaborating and understanding what's going on with the patient, it's complex.
Understanding that as the root of the kind of current issue, how is technology beginning to maybe more thoughtfully implemented or more thoughtfully utilized to enhance the collaboration that you're aiming for?
Well, one of the big shifts is really understanding that healthcare, individuals communicate in healthcare to each other, that they know each other, but a lot of communication is to people that you don't know, and you don't know who is working at whatever time. So the concept of roles, I know I need the oncologist or the cardiologist, but I don't know who's in that role. So if I just call or communicate with that role, I will get the right person, right? So a care team has roles around them. The individuals may change, but they always need a cardiologist. And maybe his partner who's covering or her partner who's covering. But knowing the technology, knowing who those people are around a patient on the care team at all times is essential to getting the right information to the right people at the right time to prevent delays of care, right? To get medication to someone who's in pain, right? For a critical team to get to the cath lab quickly, to save a life. I mean, so real-time communication is essential. And so roles are essential to get information to the right people at the right time, because you don't know who's in that role.
So, and when you're thinking about the communication, is it voice? Is it text? Kind of what are the modalities of communication that you're thinking about?
It's a combination. So when we think about a unified communication platform, it should have texting, it should have voice capabilities, both cellular and VoIP, voice over internet, and it should have alerting and notification capabilities from machines. So, there's a lot of important information that will come from a machine, a lab machine or an EHR, where it's a critical lab result, right? Or a sepsis alert. So information in real time comes from people, it comes from machines, right? And it goes to individual people and it goes to roles. So, a communication platform has to have the functionality to handle that complex environment.
Is it fair to say that it's really kind of the bridge between all the different, I'm going to say islands, although maybe that's not the best way of saying it, although maybe in reality it does actually reflect what the situation is, for better or for worse. But it's kind of, I think I'm hearing you say that the communication platform should really be almost a central place where everything is coming into and then also can then get pushed back out of.
So the way we see it is doctors and nurses are with patients every day. That's their job. Doctors go from room to room with a patient. Nurses go from room to room. Most of the day, they're with a patient. So if you're going to interrupt them or communicate with them, it should be something of importance. It's something that's actionable, not something that they can get later when they need to, right? So yes, we feel like there should be a layer of real-time communication that sits on top of the electronic health record, the phone system, the lab system, medical device, that only interrupts you and notifies you with important real-time information you need now, right? And so that's really the concept, getting information, results, communications to people that is actionable, urgent, critical, or really high priority, enough to interrupt the patient experience, right?
Kind of, I think, as you're saying, trying to prioritize those alerts.
That's right.
What are some of the strategies for being able to identify when the alert should be pushed? Which I suspect also goes into some of the reports around alert or alarm fatigue, where you can't flood people with signals, or it's just all going to become noise that gets ignored.
Yeah. So, alerts come from a lot of different places. And my nurse colleagues will, be the first to say that, doctors don't get half as many alerts as nurses, because people like to really connect nurses to everything. So it really starts with, connecting the right alerts and the settings of those alerts. So in other words, just to take a simple example, of a heart rate, you say between 70 and 100 is normal. If it goes to 101, alert me, right? Well, maybe the settings of that maybe should be 110 and 55. So setting, a standard of, I don't want to get interrupted if it's, so that it begins with, really best practices on standardizing alerts. And then then you really have to decide, what do I connect with my mobile device? Right. So nurse call is a common one we do. If a patient's in a room, they need the nurse urgently, they hit a button, right? It goes through Halo, right? And it notifies the nurse. That's an important, alert, versus something, that can wait, a non-urgent consult or something like that, or someone needs, a glass of, water, maybe that can wait 5 minutes, versus somebody's about to, is in severe pain or chest pain. Right. So prioritizing those alerts is really important.
So other than maybe getting feedback from the particular system or group that's implementing it, is there a standard or kind of standard principles for developing that prioritization?
So the standard, there's alarm committees, and every hospitals have alarm committees that study this and alert fatigue, because it's a big problem, in particular when alerts are being ignored, because a lot of them are false, right? And that creates its own problem. You're ignoring potential alerts that could be real. So there's committees that study this thing, but we generally have best practices where we come in and say, this is why we would connect to the electronic health record. It's for a critical lab, or it's for a sepsis alert, or for its urgent consult, right? And this is why we would connect with what type of medical device it would be, for a pulse ox for this particular reason, or we connect with a lab system for this. So we have best practices on how we connect with what we call these on-premise systems to bring information in and interrupt the provider. What we feel is interruption worthy. Now, every health system has their own take on that. And at the end of the day, they essentially, have the last say. But we try to do best practices and try to protect doctors and nurses as much as possible.
Yeah, no, and I think that certainly makes sense. It's, kind of, you can see the broader picture and start to see trends that individual, facilities or organizations might not either be able to access or be aware of. So that way, kind of, I think, as you're saying, by bringing best practices in, you're kind of helping to probably guide them into a direction where you see it as the way, the configuration that'll be most beneficial, but at the same time, being open to specific parameters set by each individual client.
That's right. And by unifying the platform and having these alerts from different places and this communications all in one platform, you get a really good holistic view of how much interruption and how much noise one person is getting or one department is getting, so you can really get a good idea, 15 phone calls, 14 messages, 13 nurse calls, and 12 medical in an hour, right? Something's wrong. No human can handle this, right? So we're still trying to study how much interruption is good, and how much information is too much. But you get it by doing, by having all these things in one platform, you can run reports, you can study it, and you can study the impact on the system versus how it is now kind of spread out where you can't put all that information together.
Yeah, no, certainly. If, I think, as you're saying, if you're just trying to go by gut feeling, it's going to be difficult to justify or back up a change. Whereas I think, as you just said, if you can run reports and get analytics around it, all of a sudden now you can start to spot actual trends or maybe particular problem areas, and then be able to have targeted interventions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before, nobody would know how many pages were sent or how many pages a doctor got or a nurse got. Now you can say, how many messages, how many alerts, how many phone calls people got, how quickly things responded, how fast critical teams responded to messages and to alerts and those types of things. So the whole workflow around real-time communication, now you can really kind of study it. And that's really how people work in real time. How information exchange, how, an order is given, somebody's get the cardiologist on call. I need this consult now. We need to transfer this patient to the ICU. All this work that happens before was in siloed and it wasn't really studied and captured. And now we can capture it and kind of make it more efficient.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's, kind of the breaking down of the silos concept. It feels like it's been a very common refrain over the past few years, but it's certainly, I think there's a reason for that, because it seems like in every area of healthcare that you get into, there would be silos, and having all that segmented didn't make sense. But for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Dr. Jose Barreau from Halo Health. We've been talking about communication workflows, and I think a lot of what we've been talking about so far is access and flow of data from different systems. What about like peer-to-peer or just person-to-person communications? How is that evolving as well?
Yeah, so that's evolving a lot because it's a balance. So before, it was hard to get in touch with. If you're a nurse and you want to get in touch with a doctor to discharge a patient, you're calling their office, leaving them a message. The nurse there gets to them, maybe in 20, 30, 40 minutes, and they call back an hour and a half later. That whole workflow, the patient, meanwhile, is waiting to be discharged, maybe stays to the next day, right? So there's a lot of repercussions of delays of treatment because of delays of communication. And so now the nurse would just message the, cardiologist on call, so to say, and for the discharge, hey, we need discharge orders on this patient, they need to go. I mean, it's immediate. You send it, you see that it was read, you get the call back, and, there's just no delay in discharge a patient from the hospital or whatever you're trying to get, pain medications for somebody in pain. The concept of leaving someone a message or paging someone and not knowing when they're kind of call back or not knowing if they got it is, those days are over, and we're evolving to, asynchronous kind of immediate responses.
And do you see any kind of, or encounter any resistance to kind of that immediacy of potential contact? I could easily see someone saying, well, if I'm getting all these messages, it's going to interrupt if I'm actually, with a different patient at a particular time, or,
right.
There's just so much coming through that I'm going to tune it out and just focus on what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no doubt. So initially when we started this, people were very, very worried about being over communicated with. And so we had to really build a system, we had to approach the problem and how do we protect people from over communication? So you do that multiple ways. You even build in a gatekeeper and a screening function where physicians can have their alerts and messages and calls screened through Halo, let's say, and then, respond when it's appropriate, or they don't have to. Somebody can respond for them. Things like off duty, do not disturb over. There's so much functionality that you build into a platform to kind of create that safe space so the physician knows, I'm protected. I'm not going to get dinged here, with a bunch of different things that aren't important. And so no doubt there's resistance, and there was more resistance. And eventually, with also a younger generation of doctors, and they're used to this type of technology and they're used to texting and getting back and forth, the resistance is breaking down, but also understanding, the functionality that's required to protect physicians from alert fatigue and nurses from alert fatigue is also important to build into the technology.
So is it fair to say then that, beyond, the technical capabilities that can be built into the platform, it also reinforces the fact that you need to have a really comprehensive care team to support the physicians and nurses, because, I think as you're just describing, you can't expect, nor should everything fall to just those two roles.
There's no doubt. I mean, there's no doubt that healthcare has gotten more complex, and the care team has expanded around the patient to handle that complexity. I mean, you have, caseworkers, social workers, nutritionists, and in case of oncologists, you have not only radiation oncology, medical oncology, surgical oncology, but you have genetic counseling and a whole host of support specialists to help you. So the complexity of care is increasing. The platform technology complexity has to match that so they can work effectively.
Yeah, no, and that certainly makes sense. And I think it's, kind of if you have the right tools in place too, beyond the effectiveness that you were just saying, it enhances efficiency as well by allowing things to flow to the right person at the right time, in a more appropriate manner. And then, I suspect the end result is people feel more satisfied because some of that daily hassle gets taken off their plate.
That's right. They feel more satisfied. And, when you feel more efficient, doctors and nurses, like everybody else, when they feel more efficient, they're happier and their quality of life goes up. And, when you're not interrupted needlessly, or when you're interrupted and you're not the right person, which frequently happens, it is, as health systems evolve, scheduling is a big part of communication as they evolve from paper schedules that were always inaccurate, right? So you're looking up who's on call and it's wrong because it's pasted up on a wall in a hospital and it was not updated, right? As we're evolving to put that all online for communication purposes, it's quality of life is definitely going up, and alert fatigue is definitely going down.
With the changes that have already occurred, what are the next steps that need to be taken to create probably further adoption as well as more refined utilization?
Well, I mean, one of the things has to be building more AI into the platform so it's even smarter. So, when you're walking through the halls and you need something, you can just say, hey, hello, I need this. Boom. What you need is at your fingertips. Patients generate a tremendous amount of data with hospital visits, let's say in a year, a tremendous amount of data. A small fraction of it is relevant data that a doctor or nurse needs to make a decision, a small fraction. Well, they don't want to have to hunt through 15 pages or records or online and stuff to find what they need. It should be there in an instant. And that's where we need to be as a platform. We need to get that real-time information in their hands at the time where they need it at the point of care.
When you say more AI, kind of what are you particularly thinking about? Because, I suspect that, when people hear AI, you start maybe getting these grandiose visions of, some machine doing all this free thinking, whereas the reality is it's, I think a bit more structured and...
It is. It's more complex. AI is a buzzword, and when you start digging in deep, it's complex. Take, for instance, I'm an oncologist, so I would have a patient in the hospital with a white blood cell count of 100,000. Normal is 3,000 to 10,000. Well, that's critical lab, and it rings in the laboratory. I send this to Dr. Barreau right away. Well, on the third day, when it wakes me up at 5 a.m, I say, yeah, I know the patient has 100,000. Why are we wait? Well, it's by law. You have to wake me up. So we should have systems in place that say, this is a leukemia patient. Dr. Barreau read this yesterday. Don't wake him up at 5 a.m. with 100,000 again, right? Simple things like that. And I can give you 10 examples like that AI should be able to fix. And we're on the cusp of entering that arena right now. There's some regulation out there. There's some nervousness about letting machines make decisions. But that's where we're heading.
So it kind of, I think, goes back to some of the earlier points you were making around using the tools and developing the right pathways in those tools to route the alerts at the right time. With that example you just gave, it's,
yes.
If it's supposed to be a particular way and you're expecting the high result, you don't need to be alerted unless maybe it goes to a next threshold.
That's right. So this is, you start getting to alarm management, which is then an FDA controlled situation. Well, the alarm management companies now are mostly on-premise type of alarm management. We're evolving to cloud-based alarm management, right? This is so FDA regulating software cloud management. Cloud-based is the next frontier and totally different. How do you evaluate the function? How does the FDA certify a cloud-based alarm management system that's sitting on a server at Amazon or Google? So it's easy when you have an on-premise system that our hospitals are used to deal with, but we're evolving. Software is evolving very quickly, so you should be able to get a system-wide look at all the alerts. To give you an example, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but somebody who has COPD, a breathing problem, right? When they go to sleep at night in the hospital, their oxygen drops, right? Well, and it usually comes right back up. So why are you going to alert someone when it just dips, right? We should be smart enough to say, oh, it's going to dip. If it dips for more than 10 seconds, then alert me, right? So that technology exists on premise right now. That's moving to the cloud, and that's going to change everything system-wide to be able to do that at a high scalable, high availability level across the system.
Yeah, no, and I think kind of as you're saying, with the regulations and the regulatory agencies not really sure what to do, it creates a bit of a confusing atmosphere because you've got companies like your company trying to innovate and drive change, but then you run into barriers that arguably potentially shouldn't exist, or the barrier keeps changing its place because the views keep changing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I understand, as a physician and also, as an entrepreneur, that healthcare is slower and it needs to be a little slower because we're dealing with patients' lives, and so when I put a critical team on my platform, it's important that it works, and so I understand that we need to find the right balance. Let me just say that, right? Between allowing innovation to happen, but also safety precautions being put in. Right now, I think we're a little too on the slower side of things, and we need to find a happy medium there.
Yeah, no, I like your use of the word balance there because it's, I think that's really the key for any of these new technologies that are coming into healthcare. It's you can't swing too far in any one direction or you're going to start causing safety or other issues. It's
Right.
You always need to, it's always difficult to find where that balance point is, but at the same time, it's essential to get there, or you're going to start having resistance from one side or the other because you're not paying sufficient attention to the concerns from either perspective.
Yeah, it's important not to cut corners when you're dealing with healthcare and people's lives, right? And technology. And the mindset of an entrepreneur in technology is to run fast and break things and all this type of stuff. As a healthcare entrepreneur, you have to slow down a little bit and understand this isn't, the normal technology here. You're dealing with people's lives. You're not experimenting on people. You have to make sure your things work, right? Doctors don't tolerate and nurses don't tolerate things that break all the time. Right. And patients require things that are going to help them. So it's a different thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. And believe it or not, we're already almost at the end of our time. So I want to pose one final question, which is what has you most optimistic about the future for healthcare?
Well, it's funny because, post Corona, there have been some good things that have come back after COVID. Obviously the ability for us to work together with new technology, creating vaccines and distribution, those types of things have enhanced. But really what has me excited is, it kind of brought the highlight of the importance of communication and collaboration, right? Current customers and partners of ours, the platform usage went up because the communication needs went up, and people now realize the importance of real-time information exchange and the impact on patient care, because they had to set up COVID teams, they had to get telemedicine health visits, they had to have testing quickly, they had makeshift hospitals going up, and all this required real-time communication and collaboration like never before. So I'm really excited about that because we're seeing it, the excitement in our partners and in the people trying to improve communication and collaboration across healthcare.
Yeah, no, I think as you said, a lot to be optimistic about, but believe it or not, we are out of time. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Jose Barreau, for a great conversation today.
Thank you very much. It was really a lot of fun.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.